When I think about Avatar: The Last Airbender, I always find myself coming back to the scene with Zuko and Katara in the crystal catacombs beneath Ba Sing Se. This is not only because I like these two as individuals, though I absolutely do, and it's not just because it's a very intimate scene between the two of them, though it is, but it is a brilliant scene because it demonstrates the extent to which certain moments arise that are laden with the potential for change, the potential to be a threshold between what was and what might be, and yet how those moments laden with change do not always lead to the complete transformations that they promise. And yet, even considering that, that does not demean them. That does not make them any lesser or any less relevant to study. Avatar: The Last Airbender is a great show in its refusal of determinism or teleology. Its refusal that there is this one singular end that characters are inevitably working toward, and that the experiences they have, the interactions they have, only serve to propel them toward this predestined, preconceived end. This refusal of that kind of thinking is why I think Zuko's story is so powerful and why it is much more evocative than a lot of other so-called redemption arcs that have become rather commonplace these days. Zuko is not destined to become part of Team Avatar at the first episode of this show. There is no indication that, oh yes, he's secretly such a good and moral soul. He has simply been misguided by his father's influence. That's true to an extent. It certainly is true to an extent. But that does not mean that his journey is narrow or linear or reductively simplistic. There is absolutely a world in which Zuko does not undergo this transformation. It is not inevitable. It is not this fait accompli. Now, to what extent fate or destiny operates in the world of Avatar is a complicated question. Iroh, certainly, who has the function of the philosophical and moral voice of the show, does believe in some sort of greater divine order. But he understands how fleeting and how tenuous the human capacity to grasp that order is. We might think we know it. We might think we know what our destiny is. But ultimately, our perceptions of that destiny tend to be rigid and limited and constrained by our own pre-existing moral and philosophical frameworks. Iroh's conception of this greater order, this greater destiny of sorts, does not mean that people don't have the capacity to choose for themselves, or that who they will be is predetermined. That's the exact opposite of what he's saying. He's saying that as people study themselves and learn about themselves and learn about themselves in the world, they discover for themselves what they truly want and who they truly are. And what is right for them to pursue. It's not that the universe is completely random and chaotic, but it's also not that it's rigidly ordered in a way that's easily ascertainable. People learn and discover what their destiny is, what the greater plans of the world have in store for them through introspection, through rejecting easy dichotomies, easy platitudes about how the world works. Also, the show does not necessarily endorse the perspective Uncle offers. It views it as a valid perspective and a legitimate perspective, but it's not necessarily the only perspective. And the extent to which there is this greater order, greater harmony is uncertain. What is clear is that there is not this linear teleological path for people to follow. Nothing is preconceived. The episode in the Catacombs, 220, The Crossroads of Destiny, exemplifies that even in its title. It is a crossroads. One has the capacity to decide for themselves what choice they will make. Zuko has progressed through this season and gained a greater awareness of himself in the world. He's gained a greater awareness of how shallow a lot of his prior beliefs and prejudices about the Earth Kingdom and about himself ultimately were. He gradually becomes more open and more sincere, culminating in the moment in which he reveals everything about his mother to Katara. The closeness created between them in this moment is so visceral and so poignant that it's worth noting how remarkable it is that Zuko is opening up at all. In The Storm, episode 112, Zuko and Aang's stories are closely paralleled, but it's important to note that Aang is the one telling his story to Katara. Though he is ashamed, he is at least more open, whereas Iroh is the one who has to tell Zuko's story to the crew. We do get a bit of Zuko revealing things about himself at the end of Season 1 in the final episode of Season 1, 120, but he only is free to monologue when he believes it's a soliloquy. When, despite Aang being with him, Aang is unconscious, so Zuko does not feel that he's being watched. He can speak freely, and his reflections are quite poignant. And then throughout Season 2, he gradually becomes a little more and more open. There are these three very important encounters with women throughout Season 3. All girls around the same age. The first is in episode 202, when he reveals to that woman his scar. And she extends a degree of sympathy and consideration toward him, and he's uncomfortable, and he ultimately betrays her. Then there is Jean. In episode 215, The Tales of Ba Sing Se, when he goes on a date and is able to get somewhat close with her, but only so much. And then when he's with Katara, he's able to be fully open. That is a way perhaps in which destiny, or whatever you call it, is slowly pushing him toward change. It is pushing him toward these interactions in which he has the chance to be open. And he accepts that opportunity. Again, gradually and slowly, but he accepts it. And he gradually becomes more willing to speak about himself and what he has endured and why he is the way he is and how he is trying to improve as a person. But ultimately, Avatar is not a show of hard determinism. It does not force him to make his transformation. When he is at a point in which he seems willing to finally make it, he can't do it. The old vices pull him back. And he betrays Katara. He betrays Aang too, but that's not personal. Katara takes his betrayal of her very personally. And she is not willing to trust him again until the very end of Season 3. Katara's arc throughout the show has a lot to do with the dark, bitter, resentful impulses that are within herself. They are not easily visible, since she is always trying to be so nice and generous and considerate to people. But beneath that veneer, beneath that surface of love and care and consideration, there is something harsh and resentful and cold in her. She has an inclination toward revenge, toward her rather absolutist conception of justice. This is a big reason why she is willing to overlook Jet's plans. And yet, she, at the end of that episode, understands that Jet is wrong. She does not want to be like Jet. And she tries to become more open. She tries to be willing to negotiate with a lot of these more unsavory impulses within her. These more reckless and ruthless impulses. Oh, being willing to hear out Zuko is a major step forward for her. And yet, he betrays her. That openness, that empathy, that consideration is ultimately not only ineffectual, she feels taken advantage of, and her story is set back to some degree. As Zuko points out, her anger at the Fire Nation is rather all-consuming. Her attitude toward him is directly connected to her attitude toward the guy who killed her mom. And thus the only way he can really help her attitude toward him is to give her that chance to achieve a kind of catharsis, to confront these darker impulses and move past them. The moment at the catacombs is a moment of missed opportunity in a way, but it is a moment laden with opportunity. It's simply that the characters need to be able to take it. I always think of Thomas Carlyle in hero worship and the heroic in history. His zeal for individual heroism is perhaps a bit over the top, and he has been mocked for that, but what he is making a point about is a value of the individual against these laws of political economy, of the Adam Smiths and Thomas Malthuses of the world. He asserts the idea that the individual perspective has value, that individuals can rise above their circumstances and make their own choices. Avatar very much holds to that perspective. It's clear with Zuko and Katara throughout the show, but especially in moments like the one in the catacombs. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can. You want to see more videos like this before anyone else. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.